Hello and welcome to this video on flexible working. So this cartoon illustrates possibly some of the issues with flexible working. So this manager here is having an issue with someone working from home, but they're not really working themselves, are they? So in this video, we're going to look at a range of ways in which businesses can make their workforce more flexible. And we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of flexible working from the business's perspective and also from the employee's perspective. So there are a number of different approaches a business might take to make their workforce more flexible. I'm going to flash up some key terms on the screen and talk about them. I would like you to write down a definition of each one. The first way in which we can make our workforce more flexible is by introducing multi-skilling. And that's where we train the employees to do a wider range of tasks. So this literally makes them more flexible in that they can turn their hand to different activities within the business. The second one is outsourcing. So rather than using our own employees to perform a particular task, we might pay another company to do that task for us. And that gets rid of the problem of having to hire employees in the first place, so the recruitment and training issues. And instead we can use another company to perform that task, particularly if it's not a core part of our business. The third one is part-time workers. So these are typically workers who work less than 30 hours a week. And this gives us more flexibility because we might not have a full-time role that needs to be filled by a particular worker, but if we employ a part-time member of staff, we can still fulfill that role but not have to pay them a full-time salary. A fourth way we can make the workforce more flexible is by using temporary staff. And so that's using staff that aren't on contracts with our business. We might only get them in for a short period of time to work when needed. These businesses here are all recruitment agencies or supply staff at short notice for a limited period of time. This makes us more flexible because when we're very busy, we can bring in more temporary staff, and then during quieter periods, we can let them go. Another way we can make our workforce more flexible is to offer 0 hours contracts. That means that we have a contract with the employee, but we only pay them for the hours they work, and we don't specify how many hours they're going to be given. So this is a bit like having temporary staff, but they are actually contracted to us. They are our employee. If we're not very busy, we don't call them in, we don't pay them anything. If we're very busy, we can call them in like a full-time employee, and obviously they get paid for the hours that they work. This makes it more flexible because we can bring in staff or not bring in staff to meet the demand that the business is experiencing. Lastly, we can offer our workers more flexible hours. So literally being flexible in terms of the hours that they work. Maybe they have to take the children to the school in the morning, and so we can say, right, well, you can come in later, mid-morning, but you have to stay later at the end of the day. We also might be able to allow our workers to work from home, which allows them to be more flexible, or work from a different site. So mobile working, maybe where they work from an office we have in a different part of town or a different part of the country, because they can still get the work done there, and it might be more flexible. It's nearer where they live, or they might have some other reason why they have to be in that area. These are all methods a business can use to make the workforce more flexible. So firms with flexible workers are typically made up of two types of worker. Core workers, and these are full-time employees, tend to be on permanent contracts, so have job security, are doing important roles within the business, and are highly skilled or experienced, which means they provide functional flexibility. They can maybe do a bit of marketing, they can do a bit of finance, they can manage some staff as well. You know, they're skilled and experienced, and then we would say that this, for a flexible firm, we might describe these as being core workers. We also have on the outside here peripheral workers. So these would be the part-time or the temporary, or perhaps if you're a business like Uber, perhaps we're talking about there being self-employed. These would be the self-employed workers, the drivers, who are only hired when necessary. And they really provide numerical flexibility. So when we're very busy, or things that we're trying to expand, we can increase their numbers. When we're not so busy or we're shrinking the business, then we can quite easily reduce their numbers, which wouldn't be the same for core workers. So flexible firms are typically made up of core workers and peripheral workers. A business theorist who did a lot of work on workforce planning, called Charles Handy, came up with this concept of the Shamrock organization. That organizations may be made up of 3 different types of worker. And because they have 3 different types, he likened it to a shamrock, which is a kind of flower with 3 different leaves. So on the first leaf, we have our central, our core workers. Like we said previously, these are our full-time critical employees that are vital for the business. Our second leaf is that we might also outsource some work. We might hire outside firms to perform some services for us. So rather than having our own employees do it, we might pay another company to do that for us. So for example, a school might pay a catering company to provide the catering, or they might pay a cleaning company to provide the cleaning staff. They don't necessarily need to be members of the school staff. And 3, we might have temporary hires. So these are part-timers or people on seasonal contracts who are added or removed as needed by the levels of demand for that particular business. So let's have a look at a practical example, and we're going to focus on the fashion label H&M. Now for H&M, they're going to have central core staff, and for them that might be someone like this. This is Nicole Christie, who is a fashion buyer for H&M. She decides what products they're going to sell that season. So that's a very important, critical role for H&M, and she'll be a full-time employee with a permanent contract and is highly skilled and experienced. H&M might also use some independent contractors. So they might hire a company that deals with payroll. So that company deals with paying its staff. So rather than having a full-time accountant working for H&M, they might pay another company to do their accounting for them. And so that would be an example of using independent contractors. Again, they're still part of the workforce in some respects, are doing the work of H&M. And lastly, we might have temporary hires. So for H&M, a fashion company, particularly maybe in the run-up to Christmas, where sales are quite high or as seasons change, they might add in more part-timers, more temporary staff on short-term contracts or 0 hours contracts to work in the busy periods, and then when it's not busy, then obviously those workers would be let go and wouldn't be required to work. Their contracts would expire. So we can see here H&M might be quite flexible in how they organize their workforce and use a combination of central, independent and temporary workers. So what are the advantages and disadvantages to the business of flexible working? Well, it can reduce costs because you only hire staff when they're needed. It can also reduce training costs because you can buy in specialists using contractors when they're needed. You don't have to train someone to do that job. It can help the business cope quickly with changes in demand. We can scale up our workforce, scale up our levels of production by hiring temporary staff if demand increases. Also, some workers find the possibility of working flexibly, like Uber drivers might find it quite attractive to work your own hours. Disadvantages? Well, it could actually increase costs. Often hiring a contractor to do the work for you might be more expensive than doing the work in-house, i.e. using one of your own employees. It could reduce productivity if people don't feel they have job security or aren't particularly motivated as a result of being a temporary worker. Quality may deteriorate. If I'm a temporary worker going into work for H&M, do I really care how good my customer service is? Communication can suffer because we've got a lot of new people to deal with. So the advantages and disadvantages that a business will experience will depend on how they use flexible working. That's the key one. What's the makeup of the workforce and how are they using flexible working? Now let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of the employees. So there is evidence that creating opportunities for flexible working results in better job satisfaction and higher staff morale. Also, to reflect the changing profile of the workforce, the demographics of of different countries, there are now more women in the labour market, and as a result, it's increasingly common for staff to have responsibilities, maybe for caring outside of work, and so we've seen a rise in flexible working practices. Disadvantages to employees: well, it can lead to increased workload and stress amongst employees. If you're a core worker having to do a lot of extra work, or you're having to, a contractor dealing with all this extra work that they're having to do as well. Core workers may be demotivated by being surrounded by part-time or temporary workers. And job security is a particular concern. For those workers who are working flexibly, particularly those workers on 0 hours contracts, not knowing how much money you're going to receive any given month, it's very difficult to pay for your living expenses. This links to the business theorist Maslow, who said that working in teams and having stability, security, and safety needs met would improve the motivation of the workforce. In what context is a flexible firm likely to be more appropriate? Well, particularly for seasonal businesses, any business that experiences an increase in sales in the run up to Christmas, for example, it makes sense to have a flexible workforce. Firms looking to keep their costs down might find an advantage to have 0 hours contracts workers. If the economy is not doing very well, there's a recession, people are spending less in businesses, it's easier to downsize your workforce if you have a more flexible workforce. It may be easier to attract better quality of workers if they are the sort of people who would want to be working flexibly. Also, it may be a benefit to allow business employees to be working from lots of different locations so they can be more productive because they can be working whenever they're not in the office or the business. So in this video, we've looked at a range of ways in which businesses can make their workforce more flexible and looked at the advantages and disadvantages. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.